Burgess. David has a PhD in critical theory from the University of Washington, and he's education director for the Settlement Project, which is an important project that is working to promote American values and counter woke ideology. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your effort that you're calling WICC, W-I-C-C, or Woke Ideology Critique and Counterproposal.
Sure, happy to. So together with the founder of the project, Dr. Frank Kaufman, we've been working on a book, actually, which will be forthcoming. But we created these lectures, and basically the point is to try to put what we're experiencing now with the social justice revolution or the woke revolution, however people want to identify it, as in its context, right? Which of course includes Marxism, but also I go back even to the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. There is a common theme that we find in each one of these sort of revolutionary moments.
Yeah. And you described the first as going back to, I think, was the Enlightenment or
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So something fundamental happened in the Enlightenment, right? People have all heard of Descartes' cogito, I think, therefore I am. Seems innocuous enough, but what it did was totally change the orientation of human beings. Before they were, God was the subject and the center, and this completely changed it around, and human being became the subject.
Yeah.
And from that, you have these rationalist ideologies that develop that attempt to create society based on human reason. Mm-hmm. In other words, they understood religion and the old political system as superstition, and they were going to replace that with reason. And that was the motivation of the French revolutionaries. Mm-hmm. So and they redefined God, mm-hmm. and they came up with their own new mythology, and they tried to implement that. But as I like to say, it ended in the reign of terror, and people, scratch their heads and wonder how that could happen. But actually, that was always part of the design, right? Because not everybody's in line with the new revolution. And what do you do with those people?
Right. And if you have a materialist view, then people are just can be put away and as pure animals and having no spirit. Then the next phase obviously was the Marxist revolution and the coming to power of Lenin in Russia. So we had Marxism, Leninism, and this clearly people are beginning to understand the depth of the problem there, although we're still dealing with Chinese communism today. And now we're currently in the last phase, which we're seeing with woke ideology based on recreating society with critical theory. Can you explain a little bit about how that is shaping up right now?
Yes, I can. Of course, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. And up until that time, of course, most of the academic theory was based on Marxism and a class-based critique of capitalism, Western society, Western tradition and values. And that also included other critiques like, race, critical race theory, and also gender theory. But the focus before was class. But after the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a change in focus, right, to focus on race and gender. But also those underwent something of a change too. Again, traditionally they had been Marxist critiques, but at that time there was a rise in what we call postmodernism, right? And postmodernism comes from the French theorists, and it's completely relativistic.
Hmm.
They even denied, that Marxism didn't, because it had a goal of history, believed history had a purpose,
Hmm.
which the postmodernists challenged. They said they call it, and you may have heard this term before, but they call it a meta-narrative, which is basically just a story we make up. Uh, so history is just a series of events. It doesn't lead anywhere.
Hmm.
And they even critique the very notion of truth. And so truth was rendered, shall we say, inoperative, right? There was no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as a fixed meaning. So as you can see, it's completely relativistic.
Hmm.
Uh, and this is like underlying a lot of the woke ideology because uh, what they what they did was they said they accepted the postmodern perspective and worldview, but they said, and here's the connection point I think with which people see with Marxism, they said, but we know we're oppressed, right?
Hmm.
Uh, but but because they denied truth and because they even went so far as to deny science, uh, it's based on their own personal experience,
Hmm.
right? So, and you hear this all over, and people don't really understand where it comes from. But people talk about my truth.
Right.
Well, that's based on the assumption there is no actual truth. And so we just all have our own experience. And their experience, they say, is one of oppression. And so therefore, they've adopted identity politics, and which also began as a Marxist critique. And based on identity politics, then they came up with this idea of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah. So you make the point that these three trends, first the Enlightenment, then the Marxist revolution, and now woke ideology, it redefines or rejects God, and it creates its own founding myth, which replaces the Judeo-Christian values which we have, and also importantly redefines the nature of good and evil. I think once that is done, you don't have a sense, and this gets to this idea that everybody has their own truth. If there's one truth from God, and then you can have an understanding clearer of good and evil. Um, but this then leads to viewing people in the dialectic terms of either with us or against us, uh, enemies or party goers or sympathizers, and clearly that I think is kind of where we're headed today. How does that play out under woke ideology? We're looking at cancel culture, right?
Right. Yeah. So, of course, we know in the past, uh, the French Revolution ended in the Reign of Terror, and we know, of course, what happened in Marxism. The Gulag, because people who don't agree are considered part of the oppressors, and they have to be removed. And the Leninists were very clear about this; they were explicit. But we live in a democracy, not in a failing monarchy like the French and the Russians did. So there are some limitations on what you can do to people, at least currently. But but therefore, getting rid of, well, let me back up a step. I want to make the point about good and evil because I think it's very important. In a traditional worldview, in a religious worldview, good and evil is something, we all struggle with to do good or to do evil, to do right or wrong. This is an individual matter, right? Each one of us have to confront that in our own lives. But with all of these ideologies, including the woke one, good and evil is defined in which side you're on, right?
Hmm.
It's because they all believe that in order to make people good and even perfected in some of the language, then society has to change, right?
Hmm.
So the rationale is we have to remake society so that people can be good.
Mhm.
And those people who stand in the way are clearly enemies of the revolution or enemies of the state. And so you turn your opponents into enemies, and what do you do with enemies, right? Um,
Yes,
if
ruthlessly eliminate them, right?
well, if you're Nazis or whatever, what do? You have to kill them, right? You have to get
Yeah,
rid of them.
yeah.
And that, by the way, is a common phrase that's used these days. You just call people Nazis. You turn them into enemies, and then they have to be eliminated.
Yeah.
We don't have a gulag system in America. We have a democracy, but if there's continuing weakening of our system and further chaos, I'm not a fearmonger, but if you don't learn from history, you're going to repeat it.
Yeah. And okay, so now let's touch on a little bit of the counter proposal side. How do
Okay.
we counter these three trends of the Enlightenment, of communism, and now woke ideology? What's the solution? How do we address them?
Well, the problem is that we don't offer utopia, right? I mean, that's a hook for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
Of course, these utopian ideals always wind up in terror and dystopia, but
Mhm.
setting that aside, human beings, have through the period we're talking about, made tremendous advances in progress.
Mhm.
And rather than reject religion, the people on the religious side have significantly reformed it. Right during there was a real problem with the Catholic Church in France during at the time of the French Revolution, right?
Mhm.
But it underwent tremendous reform through the Reformation, right? So, and also in America, America had slavery, but we've had a very successful civil rights program. The work isn't complete yet, but we've made tremendous progress. And our belief is that we can simply build on that. But I want to make one more, I think, what we consider as part of the most important part of the what we call the counterproposal, and that is, you hear a lot about white supremacy and white people, and there's an assumption that all the white people are the same, but actually, the religious pilgrims that came to America came from all over Europe, and throughout the history, these people of differing religious beliefs killed each other and fought terrible wars. Actually, America was a tremendous success in finding a way for those people who traditionally hated and killed one another to forge a common identity, to have a unified system, and we used to call a civil religion, right, where everybody could participate, maintain their own private beliefs, but have a public square that embraced everyone. And that's the success that made America the great nation that it became. Now, though, it's not just different Christian sects, right? There's every ethnic and religious tradition in the world is here. And frankly, for the world, there's no other place uh, for this to happen, but we need to find a way to create a common identity and a common understanding of all the world's traditions, and have one nation under God, as our motto says, right? That we can all not just tolerate one another, which you hear a lot of, but learn to appreciate each other and create and that's really a lot of the effort of our counter proposal, is to try to, we call it a refounding of America.
Yeah, which dovetails nicely with what I'm calling the VOC worldview, which again is based on the idea that each person, as you say, has infinite value as a creation of God, and that this is the starting point for really finding real solutions. I agree with you. The vision of the Marxists and the woke ideology, it provides a non-religious, non-spiritual vision, which It really needs to be countered. Yeah. Last question. You mentioned, yeah, let's look at a renewed American Revolution. And what would that look like? How would we go about revitalizing the American Revolution?
Uh, good question. So part of it is uh, part of it is, and we state this in our counterproposal. We're none of us are our own point of origin, right? I mean, we all have a navel. We all came from somewhere. So you have to find what we share in common. The other thing we share in common is that we all come to being in a family. And yes, some are better than others, and some are more privileged than others. But those family bonds are an important part of our identity. Many times the sort of rationalist or materialist view views us all as individuals, but we're not, right? So those are things on which which we have in common and upon which we can build. And then, you need to create communal bonds, right? That those things exist through churches and social organizations. We did this before. It's no different this time. It's just it has to include everyone, right? So, and yes, it's a stretch. It was a stretch for our founders to for Baptists or Methodists to accept Quakers or vice versa. So we have to stretch ourselves, right? But creating community will allow us, I think, to have sort of deeper connections and build a national unity. Because the problem with always on the side of the secularists is it's divisive, and certainly DEI has been incredibly divisive, and people are recognizing that a lot of these trainings don't solve anything; they create more problems. So it requires an approach that recognizes the infinite value of each person, right? And that's what is always rejected by the secularists, right? Because if you're not with them, you're against them, and you're an enemy that has to be eliminated.
Right. We've been talking with David Burgess. He's the education director for the Settlement Project. David, how can people find out more about the Settlement Project and your woke ideology critique and counterproposal?
Yeah, Bill. So the easy way is our website's very simple, SP for Settlement Project 12, the number 12, sp12.org. We're doing some spring conferences. There's one in the Bay Area this weekend, and also we're going to be in Columbus and Virginia next month. So there's information there on the website, and then but the website is continually updated as new information is available. So that's a good location.